Hello, I'm Dr. Clive Callender, pinch hitting for Keith Melanson today and Dr. Kendrick Curry for another episode of Kidney Talks. And we have a special program today. We're representing the Ron Joy Paul Kidney Center, the Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church, and National MOTEP. And then we have as a special guest today, Kenny Boyd, who is the CEO, the COO of the Infinite Legacy, which is a program organ procurement agency that is responsible for the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. And today we're going to talk about a topic that's really dear to my heart, which is the National Minority Donor Awareness Month, which is something that highlights the importance of getting all of the minority communities to be involved with organ donation and transplantation. And so, without further ado, welcome Mr. Kenny Boyd to tell us about National Minority Donor Awareness Month, as well as other aspects of organ donation and transplantation.
Good afternoon, Dr. Callender. What a pleasure to be with you, and a pleasure to present to our audience during National Minority Donor Awareness Month. And I thought it'd be fitting to share with our audience a little bit about how OPOs, organ procurement organizations, work with our community to facilitate donation and why that's important to our Black community. So if you can bear with, we'll get into this presentation, and then I look forward to engaging in any conversations that you might have. I always like to state that I don't have any conflicts or disclosures to share. And so that would be for the last 24 months. And so today's discussion, be happy if at the end of this, you felt comfortable about understanding how organ procurement organizations work in the organ donation space. Give you a brief history about organ donation, and then talk about the current state of organ donation in the United States of America. Like to describe the transplantation and donation ecosystem, and that really speaks to how people receive transplants, when an individual or family makes a decision for the individual to donate, how we identify recipients, and then how we work with our community to facilitate education and outreach around organ and tissue donation. So I'd like to tell you about Infinite Legacy. We are a federally designated organ procurement organization. We're one of 55 such organizations, and we are a non-for-profit, and we're responsible for facilitating organ and tissue donation at the hospitals designated to us by CMS. And so our service area here covers the state of Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the District of Columbia. We provide services to 68 hospitals and 8 transplant centers. It's about almost 9.9 million individuals that are serviced by Infinite Legacy. Role of our organ procurement organization and any others are we assess donation potential. We facilitate the recovery of organs from authorized donors, and then we follow national policies to offer those organs to transplant centers. Transplant centers are the ones responsible for making decisions about who is transplanted, and then we also provide public and professional education. When we talk about our transplant centers and this whole system, I think throughout this discussion, one thing I'd want everyone to take away is that the system for the allocation of donated organs is one that's fair and equitable. So what we can speak to is once an individual is added to the list, then that process is fair and equitable in terms of identifying who is the match. A little history is always important, and we can start back and look at the last few decades of transplantation. We can look at 1950, where things began, and that was the first kidney transplant, and that was between two brothers. So it was a living related kidney from one brother to another. It takes us all the way through 1965 and in the 80s. Um, I'm getting some background noise, Dr. Calendar. Are you hearing that, or am I good?
Comes and goes. Not now.
Okay. I'm not sure if that's my microphone. So, but you can see that 1950 to 1980, when we look at the history of transplantation, including the first heart transplant in 1980, and the first liver transplant in 1965, that transplant was still experimental, and that individuals were living, but the donated organ usually lasted about a year, and that really it was still experimental. It's a lot of work to do. Mortality rates were high, and one of the challenges with that was the introduction of something foreign into the recipient. And so, how do we manage that from a medical standpoint? And that really centered around immunosuppressive therapy. And so, in 1983, cyclosporin was approved, and was the first anti-rejection medication that was widely used in transplant patients. And what this did, it really was a game changer, because there were as an increase in success rates, because we were able to manage the immune system of the recipients, and in return, graft and patient survival began to increase. And what that led to is organ transplantation becoming an acceptable treatment modality for several different organ system failure diagnoses. So it brings us to the current state of transplantation. As of August of this year, nationally, there are 106,732 individuals who are waiting for a life-saving or life-enhancing transplant. Here in Infinite Legacy service area, about 3,874 individuals are waiting. In 2024, there were 48,150 transplants performed. The sad part of that narrative is that 4,671 people died waiting on that list. That's about 13 people who die every day waiting for an organ transplant. And it is because as we continue to transplant, additional individuals are added to the list at a rate of about one individual every 8 minutes. So just to kind of give you a visual of what 106,000 plus people looks like when they're placed all together. This is the University of Michigan's football stadium, and they refer to it as the Big House. And its capacity is 107,000. And so this is 107,000 individuals. And imagine that everybody in this stadium is waiting for a transplant. And this is this is our challenge. This is what we're up against in terms of meeting the needs of those in our community and our nation who are waiting on a second chance. They could be waiting for a heart, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, or small bowel. And one organ donor can save as many as 8 lives. It's because we have 2 kidneys and 2 lungs. So one individual who donated all organs, and we had suitable recipients for those gifts, could save 8 lives. That same individual could impact 50 to 100 lives through the gift of tissue. That could be heart valves and pericardium, cornea, whole eyes, bone, skin, ligaments, and other connective tissue and saphenous vein. So the opportunity for an individual to improve the lives of others after their death is tremendous. And that's part of the work that Infinite Legacy does in terms of educating our community so that people understand the impact that they have or the opportunity to leave a living legacy, because that is essentially what happens when we make that heroic decision to donate. So keeping it in mind that picture of the Michigan Stadium, what you see is that demand continues to outpace supply. And there is a widening gap between those who could benefit from transplantation from that gift. Donation is not a frequent opportunity. Less than 1% of all deaths occur in a way that allows for organ donation to happen. Individuals who are organ donors are individuals who die in a hospital, in an ICU, and connected to a ventilator. We also know that authorization plays a huge role because people need to say yes to donation. So what we know is 90% of the majority of Americans feel positive about organ donation. And 51% have signed up to be an organ donor through their driver's license, a donor registry, or some other documentation. 25% have not signed up, but expressed a willingness to be a donor. And only 24%, less than 1 in 4, are unwilling to be donors. Yet, when we look at our realization rate across the country, it doesn't match that. The national authorization rates are somewhere between 50 and 60%. When we look at that national wait list and how that inability to convert that potential for donation impacts the wait list, then we can look at this visual that looks at wait lists and transplant and donor activity from 2006 to 2024. You can see the red line at the bottom is the number of actual organ donors. And we've managed since 2006 to increase that number measurably. And in the last few years, we've continued to reach milestones in the number of transplantable organs, with 2024 representing a record number of organs transplanted at 48,150. But it still falls far short of the 106,000 plus organs needed to meet the waitlist demand. And that's our challenge as a community. That's our challenge as an organization. And it's something that we focused a lot of attention on at Infinite Legacy to devise strategies to increase donation awareness, to increase donor registration, and then also collaboration with our key hospital and other healthcare partners so that we can realize these opportunities. Going back to this critical need for donors and why it is relevant to this audience is you can see of the more than 106,000 individuals waiting, 29,901 of those are members of the Black community. Another 25,000 plus are from Hispanic, and 8,700 are Asian. 93% of that breakdown are waiting for a kidney transplant. Some wait list data from 2024, and you can see this is just another breakdown of the wait list of all organs waiting. 27.8% of that wait list is from Black Americans. We make up 29.9% of those waiting for a kidney, 7% waiting for a liver, 27, almost 28% for a heart, and 14% for a lung. You can compare that to the non-minority proportion of the weight. And I would ask you to just take a visual of that statistic because it's quite telling as I move through this data. When we look at total transplantations, we can see that in terms of the percentage of who received an organ, Blacks received about 22.8% of the organs transplanted, Hispanics 49.1%, when we look at the minority rates for transplant recipients. These are the donation rates, and this is where our challenge is. So of the 24,000 and plus organ donors in 2024, 7.3% came from living donors from the Black community. 14.8% were made up of the deceased donor, and that total is 12.6%. So of the 24,000 organ donors, Blacks only made up 12.6% of all organs donated in 2024. Which means of the total candidates currently waiting for a transplant, 27.8% were Black, non-Hispanic. Black African Americans received 22.8% of the organs transplanted. So we represented a greater percentage of the list than what we used from the list. We make up 27.8% of those waiting. We received 22.8% of the organs that were transplanted. And in 2024, non-Hispanic Black Americans comprised only 12.6% of organ donors. So the organ donors recovered from non-Hispanic Black Americans or Black African Americans, 17% came from living donors as compared to 30% of organs recovered from non-Black communities. So we only make up 12.6% of organ donors, and we are trailing in our organ donation through the living donor pathway. Just some other ethnicities and how they look at this. Hispanics make up about 15% of the people who are waiting for a transplant, and their donation rate is about 15%. Asian Americans make up about 8.2% of those waiting, and they received about 5.8% of the organs transplanted. So, a quote from the American Society of Nephrology is that Black Americans face disparities in nearly every step of transplant care. Black Americans are less likely than white Americans to be identified as transplant candidates, referred for evaluation, put on kidney transplant wait list, receive a kidney transplant, receive a higher quality kidney from a living donor, while also being more likely to receive lower quality kidneys and have poor transplant graft survival. I think we know this, but illnesses in African American and other minority communities result more frequently in amputation, blindness, and end-stage organ failure. So the need for organ donation and transplant is more pronounced in minority communities, and that's because of our high mortality rates and or morbidities in diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease, which contribute to organ failure. And especially kidney failure. We know that minorities are 3 times more likely than white Americans to have kidney failure. We also know that we access healthcare later in the process, if even at all. We know that minority transplant candidates wait longer than non-minority transplant candidates for kidney, heart, and lung transplants. We also know that minority donors increase the probability of minority recipients when matching some organs, and this is specific in kidneys. And so that brings us back to the breakdown. 85% of the people on the wait list patients are waiting for a kidney transplant, and 30% of the kidney wait list is comprised of Blacks, but only 16% of all donors were Black. Then we're not positioning our community with the best opportunity to receive a transplant. So how do organ procurement organizations like Infinite Legacy work to address this? So there are really three routes to organ donation. You can receive an organ transplant from a living donor. That can be from either someone you're related to or an altruistic donor. Those are more likely going to be kidney transplants, but sometimes can also be a portion of your liver. You can receive an organ from a deceased donor, and that deceased donor can be either someone who's someone who's declared brain dead. That's an individual who has lost all brain function and is legally declared dead, but still being maintained on life support. And these are the typical organ donors. An individual can also receive an organ from a donor, which is donation after circulatory death pathway. And these are patients where organs are recovered after their heart has stopped following withdrawal of life support. Organ procurement organizations facilitate the last two options, which are organ from donors who are declared brain dead or organs that are recovered after circulatory death. And you can see the organs that can be recovered. Organ donors recovered after brain death yield the most opportunities to transplant organs. All transplantable organs can be recovered from those patients. Donation after circulatory death is normally limited to liver, kidneys, lungs, and sometimes the heart. We're also able to recover tissue and even opportunities for organs and tissues for research. Just one more quick summary on that. So brain dead donors are declared brain dead. And I really repeated this slide because I need everyone to understand that organ procurement and organ donation in general operate under the dead donor rule, which means that organs are only recovered from deceased patients when an organ procurement organization is facilitating that from a patient. So whether it is someone who travels through the brain death pathway or the donation after circulatory death pathway, organs are only recovered from patients who have been declared dead. A little bit about the ecosystem and how we ensure that it's fair and equitable. Organ donation is overseen by the federal government and through HHS, or Health and Human Services, and through two branches within HHS, organ donation is managed. On one side is CMS, or Center for Medicare and Medicaid Studies, and organ procurement organizations, hospitals, and dialysis centers are all overseen. Organ procurement organizations are designated by CMS, and so there are rules that we all participate in and are monitored for compliance by CMS. The OPTN, which is also under HHS, is where transplant centers, the organization that manages the wait list, testing labs, and other entities that are a part of this process are overseen. And so together, CMS and the OPTN work together to create the ecosystem that ensures that it is a fair and equitable system. It is illegal to buy, sell, barter, or trade organs in the United States of America. And anyone who's receiving a transplant from a deceased patient must be on that national wait list. Organ procurement organizations also facilitate relationships with the hospitals as mandated by CMS. And so we do that through professional education. So our hospital education focuses on ensuring that our hospital partners are up to speed with the rules that CMS has put in place, and they're called CMS conditions of participation. And they require every hospital to have an agreement with an organ procurement organization. They're required to refer all deaths and all imminent deaths to Infinite Legacy or the organ procurement organization in their community. and it requires that all families of all deceased patients receive the opportunity to make a decision about organ donation. It also requires hospitals and OPOs to honor a donor's known wish, and this is known as first person authorization. So if it's on your driver's license, if you've designated yourself to be a donor, legally, we are responsible to honor your wish. The hospitals and hospitals are of the conditions of participation really are the guiding principles for any hospital that expects to receive or participate in the Medicare program. And they were enacted for a few specific reasons. But the most important was significant progress in the science of transplantation, and that the government recognized was a widening gap between those who could benefit from transplantation unavailable organs. They recognized also it was a 37% organ utilization rate, and we estimate that an estimated 12 to 15,000 deaths each year in the United States could provide opportunities for organ donation. So approximately 5,500 of these deaths currently resulted in organ donation. And so better hospital participation through the guidance of the CMS conditions of participation would support more available organs to be transplanted into those who are waiting for a transplant. This is a little bit of a deeper dive into the conditions of participation. Again, they must have an agreement with an organ procurement organization, and they must refer every death. It's called routine referral. It must cooperate with us in honoring a family's wish to transplant those gifts. We must ensure that the family is informed. So for the physicians who might be participating today, it is appropriate to contact your organ procurement organization during every donation opportunity, and that's known as required requests. We don't want you to do it. We provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week support to deploy expertly trained individuals who can facilitate those discussions. Hospitals must also work with organ procurement organizations to ensure that their staff have been educated appropriately. We review death records to identify opportunities for improvement and to identify missed opportunities for donation. And that's key in terms of the collaboration along the way to improve it. First person authorization, also known as donor designation, is legislation that makes indicating yourself to be a donor legally binding, much like a living will or an advance directive. And so through the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, it says that if an individual is registered, it's legally binding permission for donation at the time. And so this is despite someone else in your family having a different opinion about organ donation. And I think this is why it's so important, and we'll talk about our community outreach and education in a moment, that if you've made that decision to donate, that you share that decision with your family. This slide is called the U-turn, and this is for providers, but I thought I'd put it here because I think there's so much in the media now, and some of it not positive about how organ donation is viewed. Organ donation are organizations, and organ donation is part of a continuum of care, and that individuals who receive care at a hospital, the hospital providers are not focused on your potential to be a donor. They're focused on saving your life, and they're going to provide aggressive treatment. It's just sometimes, despite their expertise, despite their technology, your injury is not something that they're able to reverse. And at some point, they are becoming aware that they're losing that fight, and they'll make a referral to the organ procurement organization. And if appropriate, which means that death has occurred or is imminent, then they will invite us to work with families. And during that process, if a family chooses donation, we collaborate with the hospital in order to realize a donation opportunity and save lives. And we call it the U-turn because if we were not involved, and you arrived at a hospital with a non-survivable injury, that line would go straight down. But because of the collaboration between healthcare providers and organ procurement organizations, we're able to save lives, and those legacies provide families some solace. It allows them to memorialize their loved one and to make them a hero, and to join a community of people who have given the gift of life. I also wanted to talk about organ donation. We talked about the fact that as many as 13 people die every day, and that the supply of organs continues to not meet what the wait list is demanding. A total of 7,033 people became living donors in 2024, donating either a whole kidney, a segment of their liver, or even a uterus. While the most common age range of a living donor remains 35 to 49, there's an increasing number of donors that are age 50 or older. Most notable is the increase in living donors age 65 and older. In 2024, there were 476 such donors, and an increase of 14.2% over 2023, and more than double the annual total each year up through 2016. So that's significant. But again, when we look at the opportunities, especially in the Black community, to decrease the wait time, to decrease some of the additional health challenges that occur because of long-term dialysis, living donation is an opportunity to provide people with that transplant. So how do we make our community aware? We do a lot of public education, and this is consistent. I think we're here to talk about Minority Donor Awareness Month, but for Infinite Legacy, it's every day is Minority Donor Awareness Month. And that education is comprehensive. We work with our Department of Motor Vehicles and our schools and our community organizations, and we target our minority community specifically through groups that are embedded within Infinite Legacy. It's our African American Outreach Task Force, the Decision Project, which I'll talk to you about, and our collaboration with historically Black colleges and universities. So the Decision Project, which was founded in 2016 at Infinite Legacy and trademarked in 2022, was a data-driven grassroots initiative that really came out of studying why there were poor authorization rates in Baltimore. And so what they realized through that is that the community was not worried about discussing their attitudes around organ donation. They had other issues. They had issues about food security. They had issues about healthcare and whether the system provided them access to care. And so the goal of the Decision Project was to partner with those communities directly and meet them where they were at to address their needs. And this came from focus groups, and this came from community health fairs. I have had the opportunity and the blessing to work in this field for 33 years. And what I recognize from the Decision Project is extended the foundation that MOTEP had put forth. MOTEP was the blueprint. I think the Decision Project grew from that and found additional ways to bring in additional community resources to meet the needs. And so a big part of what TDP does is to bring community partners together and have health fairs and other events. And so some of their partners you can see here assist them with that community outreach. They're either embedded or are aligned in their desire to connect with these communities. You can see that the community engagement snapshot through 2025 of the Decision Project is that they've engaged the community. They have a STEM program that reaches out to middle and high school students and Dr. Calendar, thank you for your support of that. We've had focus groups. We've launched several campaigns on collaborating with our partner organizations, all to continue to connect with our community to maintain discussion around organ tissue and eye donation, but doing that in a way that is more collaborative. And the OPO is no longer seen as someone who's entering the community just because we're asking for something, but because of the work of the Decision Project to partner on again the health screening and vaccination and other services. We're seen as a part of that community voice. So when I talk about our community education, I talk about our collaboration with hospitals. When I talk about how organ procurement organizations function, all of that was to provide you with these key takeaways. Regardless of some of the dialogue that goes on in the media and in the sensationalized stories, the system strives to be fair and equitable, and that the Department of Health and Human Services oversees the ecosystem, that hospitals and organ procurement organizations collaborate to provide organs. Organ procurement organizations and UNOS, which is the organization that manages the wait list, collaborate to identify recipients. Organ procurement organizations and transplant centers collaborate so that those donated gifts make it to the intended recipients. And then transplant centers work with recipients to identify and facilitate living donation. And I'd be happy to answer any questions and talk about this work. And I know, Dr. Calendar, this is Minority Awareness Month, but as I said, for Infinite Legacy, every day is Minority Donation Awareness Month, and we emphasize the importance of our community understanding the importance of knowing the power they hold to designate themselves a donor, to talk about organ donation in their community, to provide a second chance at life with another individual. You're muted, Dr. Calendar.
Well, I was saying Dr. Melanson is here now, so we can turn the question and answer period over to him to facilitate any questions that you may have. Dr. Melanson, welcome. And
thanks, Dr. Calendar. I'm sorry I was late. I was double booked, but I ran over when I heard Kenny Boyd was speaking. I had to be here, so luckily I made it just in the nick of time. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your presentation, Kenny, but here's my question. For those of us, and Calendar's been doing this for a long time, I, as well as you, we go out into the minority community and we talk a lot about organ donation. And as you know, Black people, Hispanic people, people of color, for years have been concerned. They say, well, there's a lot of myths out there, and they're going to take our organs and they're not going to care for us the way they should in the hospital. And as you know, just as of late, there's been this negative media out there where it seems like in some specific little carved out places in America, that sort of thing seems to have come true. It's almost like a sci-fi movie, right? Where people that did sign up to be organ donors may have been brought to the operating room a little quickly. I know this has to be a shot across the bow for us in organ transplantation, but particularly in the minority community. What are you doing to combat against this horrible negative media?
It's a comprehensive approach, and thank you for recognizing how that challenges. I think, when I spoke about the Decision Project and its work in the community, the focus groups often reveal that there's still a general mistrust of the medical community from any disadvantaged community, Black, white, or socioeconomically disadvantaged. That mistrust exists. And so when stories like that are promoted in the media, I think that it is very easy for them to gain traction. Infinite Legacy strategy is, we are very present on social media on all channels. But the other thing that we do very well is we have an ambassador program that is made up of donor families and recipients. And so we're able to do something that is important. And I encourage anyone who has a donor testimony to do, which is to share your story. So if you're a donor family from a minority community, you can share your experience and help to balance out that narrative. I also think that organizationally, what we've done is looked at our policies and procedures and tightened them up to listen to that dialogue and some of the recommendations coming out of Health and Human Services to ensure that our staff is hear something, say something. If there is doubt, if there's trepidation from anywhere on the healthcare team about someone's suitability for organ donation or the condition that they're presenting in, then we are pushing the pause button and investigating and resolving those questions before we move forward. I think at the forefront, we value our donor families at Infinite Legacy, and we know that donation begins with that generosity of that family or that heroic decision that that individual made, and we're committed to being good stewards of that gift.
Yeah, no, I know that, Kenny, and that's the problem. I think that you guys, us, I mean, we know everybody in transplant, right? And we know that 99.99% of people are doing exactly the right thing. But that doesn't matter because it doesn't take much before someone does something stupid that costs all of us. So I think the answer, kind of like what you said, I think the answer is to go back to how it all started. And I think it's right here on this program, we've got the great Clive Callender. And I think that a part of what we should be doing, and you know this better than anybody, is to go back to what he taught us, right? Which is MOTAP started as grassroots. And that's where we got to go back to basics. But before I'm gonna ask Dr. Callender a question, but I want to ask you one more question, which is, all right, I always say the good news way outweighs the bad news. But it's like what do they say in the news media? If it bleeds, it leads. Right? They always want the flashy story. So I wonder if in your big organizations, AOPO or whomever, are you guys trying to reach out to the people? Because it seems like it's the same reporters, the same newspapers. Have you reached out and said, all right, look, mea culpa, we've made some mistakes, but come and look at what we're doing that works. 90% of what we're doing is good. I mean, you tend to find a bad story. Have you guys done that sort of thing? Because I don't see those, or at least I don't see those nationally. I see them locally, but those are local stories. Why are those not national stories?
I wish I had the answer of why those aren't national stories. I think that and again, both of us being taught by the gentleman on the screen, we don't make a lot of excuses. I think that their media tends to love what you said, which is it bleeds, it leads, and I think that the story line that has been promoted for several years now is that the whole ecosystem of donation is failing. And so a lot of the voices who are consuming that space aren't receptive to anything that would ask them to question the narrative that they've already started. But our national organizations like AOPO and the Alliance have committees that speak to all of these articles the moment that they're posted. They're reaching out to these reporters. They are invited in. We've submitted responses to the stories as well as the congressional hearings, but they're not getting the same traction as a reporter who can write something from a slant. You're a good surgeon because you're very skilled with your hands, and the reporters of these stories are very good reporters because they're skilled with their words and know how to slant that story in a way that gets the emotional response that they want. That the system is broken and someone is suffering because of it. I think the system is broken because we have not taken a pause as a community and as a nation to really address the fact that organ donation and that decision to be a donor is a national thing. So when I spoke about the conditions of participation and the motivation behind CMS putting those in place, they were to feed the fact that there was a national wait list of people waiting for an organ. But then we kind of have taken a pause there. And what's the next really meaningful move that the government will make on the front end in terms of both ensuring that hospital providers are referring every death, and that the community or the nation really truly understands the importance of making a decision about what happens to their organs after they die.
Well, we already are way over policed, in my opinion, but I'm afraid. I think that the circulatory death stuff is about to be really tightly scrutinized. That's, I think, what's coming down the pike. It's pretty obvious.
Yes.
But going to Dr. Callender. All right, Dr. Callender. So you're a consultant. So we bring you in. We pay you a lot of money to come in and give us some advice. Given what you have done, which is you totally transformed the landscape of minorities donating in this country. Minorities were not donating, and after the sort of education that you and your organization provided, it was a sea change, right? So obviously, you know what you're doing in regards to your influence over that and even the majority community, because what you started, it has helped grow. And I think it's wrong to pigeonhole you and say you got Black people to donate, because more people donate, period, because of some of the things that you did. So now, Big Money Kenny Boyd brings you in and says, all right, Dr. Callender, help us out. Tell us about your history, what you were able to do, and what do we need to do today to get the train back on the tracks?
Thanks for that question. I think God will be better to answer that question. But my recommendation is that one of the things, emphasize the positives. And I think, for example, the United States leads all countries, and we've performed over 1 million organ transplants. Nobody else has done that. So focus on the positives. You talk about 13 people die every day because of the shortage of donors. When I started, there was about 25 people dying every day because of the shortage of donors. So we're now down at the point where it's 13. So that my take is that we should emphasize the positives and try to make sure that the media does this, whether they like it or not. And I think that we have to force feed them to really take note of the fact that while the United States may not be number one in the world, it is at least number two. And I think that these are positive aspects of what we have accomplished need to be addressed. I know that the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have identified that the organ transplant system is not equitable, and they have required some changes that move us closer towards equity. But on the other hand, we have markedly improved the efforts of inequity that existed when I first started in 1973. And looking at the discriminatory practices that were there then, I think we've come a long way. And I think these positive things that have taken place, we have to find a way to make them the story rather than the bleeding leading.
And that's so well put, Dr. Callender. And, I see that as a 30-second spot for the Super Bowl Dr. Callender, talking about what has happened over his lifespan in transplantation. 1973, how difficult was it for a Black person to get a transplant in this country? How equitable was transplantation back then? What things have transpired over his career? I totally agree with you, Dr. Callender. Emphasize the positives. Kenny, I mean, AOPO, they get enough money from all the different OPOs. Buy that 30-second ad and have Dr. Callender do that for the Super Bowl this year.
I'll work on that. I think that I think you might have more star power than me on that one.
I thought it was a brilliant presentation that emphasized this, how important it is to do all of the things that you mentioned. But as I mentioned, I think somewhere along the line, we've got to get the Congress of the United States and the president, as well as the OPOs, to recognize that we must emphasize the positives. And I think that, of course, is what you've been trying to do. But nationally, it seems as though we want to accentuate the negatives. So that's my advice.
You know, Dr. Melancon, one of the things, just to pick up on Dr. Callender, not all of the scrutiny is bad. I think that, and you pointed out that you have 99% of the community does good and 1% does bad. We all kind of have to carry that and share that burden. But I think it has brought even greater attention, even from good performing organizations, to look at their processes, and that's going to increase their performance also. Is, I think, one missed opportunity to realize donation, one subpar interaction with a family or questionable process, it has a negative impact on the whole community, on the donation community. So I think that's positive. And I think the other thing that we don't talk about enough is, the opportunities for donation live in hospitals. And hospitals really are the beginning of that opportunity. Donation is at the end of the care continuum. And if a hospital is not referring those patients appropriately or not collaborating with the OPO when that care transition is moving from life-saving to end-of-life support for that family in a compassionate and sensitive way, that impacts how that family receives that opportunity to donate, especially if that individual has not made their wishes known through a registry, right? Because someone's decision about donation is not always about the opportunity to save someone's life. They're disappointed or angry because they felt like the physician never came and spoke to them. And when he did, he didn't take time to answer their questions. And the nurses weren't compassionate about the size of their family or how they grieve, because one community might grieve different than another. All of those things impact donation outcomes also. That is not really revealed in the data.
One of the things that's important is to recognize that what we're talking about is imbalance. What we have to have is balance of the negative and the positive, with a highlighting of both, indicating that, yes, we are aware of the negatives and we're working to correct them, but we also are aware of the positives, and we want to balance the stories, and that balance is lacking. So whatever efforts we have that we can use to get more of a balanced story out to the public is what is important.
Yeah, it's so many things in this country where we spend the most money in the world on healthcare, and so in so many instances, when you compare like primary care, access to care, and whatnot in America compared to the rest of the world, we are behind, even though we spend all this money. I think what Dr. Callender is saying is a very good point, because when you look at equitable access, this is one of the things we actually do well. It's because of the great work of people like Dr. Callender and others that sat on those committees, made those arguments for years, and pushing all of these organizations to be sensitive to the needs of women and Native Americans and Asian Americans and African Americans and whomever. And now we have a system that we can be very proud of, right? And so I think that's a very, very positive message. And I do believe that Dr. Callender is right, that we have to be proud of that and push it out there, but also be cognizant of what you were saying, Kenny, which is everything beyond people that work for the OPOs, people that work at the hospital, the nurse in the ICU, the doctors, every one of these people out there are ambassadors for organ transplantation. And so something could be set in a very negative direction by someone that has nothing to do with your OPO. Like, I want to ask you a question. If in where you work, how many hospitals that are in your donor service area do you have someone actually in that hospital? It's only going to be the very large referring hospitals, but you cover a lot more hospitals than that. There's no way you can have eyes and ears on the ground in most of the hospitals that you deal with, right?
No, so we have assigned personnel in-house for our high potential hospitals, our trauma centers, our level 1 trauma centers. So that's about 6 of our 68 hospitals have designated staff. The other hospitals then are covered by an individual who has a portfolio. And so they might be there 3 times a week or 4 times a week to be present, to round, provide education. But those high volume hospitals do have assigned staff who are stationed, have workstations, and are actually in that hospital on a daily basis. And it makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I know Dr. Callender has been a big troubadour of this. I would believe that representation within the OPO makes a difference, right? People that are multicultural, can speak various language, come from the community. I know here in the DC area, we have a very large Hispanic population in one pocket of our community. We have, and then, I'm using Hispanic as a generic term, but you got the El Salvadorian community, you've got people from Honduras, Mexico, and then you've got the African-American community. So I'm sure that your organization and the diversity of that organization probably impacts donation rates from all those various communities.
Absolutely. I think that an organ procurement organization should always reflect the community that it serves, and especially in its outward-facing roles. And so Infinite Legacy has a community outreach department that is extremely diverse so that we can meet people where they are. We have family services specialists who facilitate discussions with donor families to hopefully assist the family in making a positive yes decision when given the opportunity to donate. And we're positioned to meet families from a majority of the ethnicities and overcome the language barriers in our community. And then in our hospital service representation, our teams that manage those hospital relationships, we are also very mindful to reflect our community.
Yeah, Dr. Callender, you have any other questions? Oh, you're on mute again, Dr. Callender.
I was going to mention that one of the programs that Infinite Legacy has championed is the program of going into the middle schools and educating the parents, the teachers, and their students to have more people of color in transplant organizations. There are 55 organizations, and of those, less than 10 have minority leadership. And so we need to get to the point where we're in double digits, at least in the 20s, 25 of people at the top of these organizations that are people of color.
Well, Dr. Callender, I know I saw your most recent presentation at the big transplant meeting in San Francisco, and I'm always surprised at how people are still surprised that African Americans donate their organs so often, and how we oftentimes outpace our population. And again, same thing with the Hispanic community, even non-documented people. And I think that's a message that needs to be shouted out from the highest hill in every town, because it changes perspective. Just like these false, sometimes in certain media organizations, you hear these false statistics about, African Americans making up 13% of the population, but 50% of the crimes, which is totally, completely false. And so these statistics can be manipulated in a negative. When you have positive statistics, like the statistics of donation, and again, I know, Dr. Callender, you and your organization had a lot to do with this, but these are very positive things. These are the sort of things, Kenny Boyd, your organization and organizations like yours should be trumpeting. Look at what we're doing, and compare that to France or England or wherever. And that's where what Dr. Callender is talking about is so salient. We are doing really, really good things. We need to get better, but that's something that you should be proud of and should be, touting.
Can we like this on our social media pages, Dr. Melancon, so you can see these stories that my comms and marketing team is pushing out on a regular basis, or have you blocked us?
Well, when I was watching 60 Minutes, I didn't see it. See, that's what I'm saying. You got to get it out there. It's got to be, on the Super Bowl. I mean, when I'm watching the Yankees, my team, that's when I want to see these commercials, Kenny. I want to see them, big.
We'll need your credit card for that primetime media space, and I think that's the challenge, and that's what I was referencing when I said, I think that as much as I disagree with a lot of things with the current administration, one thing that came out of this leader at the end of the last term was the executive order that put a focus on kidney care and those resources that started this discussion, and that was a positive. But if you're not going to fund it, don't mention it.
Well, remember that social media is one of the greatest problems we have in this country today.
Yep.
Misinformation and disinformation occurs prominently on social media, so that it doesn't replace the grassroots effort. And so the combination is what matters.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you,
Melancon, but before we wrap, our mentor wanted to know why you were late for rounds.
Well, having done some 40 transplants so far,
yeah. I'm nonstop working, Kenny.
He was triggered, Dr. Callender. He was triggered.
See, Dr. Callender, people like Kenny, they go down to Martha's Vineyard and they live that kind of life. Well, while I'm here, working all night doing transplants. So you tell everybody at the Inkwell I said hello, Kenny.
Dr. Callender, it's such an honor to always be with you, and hopefully made you proud. But I want to thank you on this stage for the example that you put forth, because I think that like most things, like fashion, there's no new fashion. We just rediscovered something that was already put out there, and we washed it and put it back on. And I think that when we look at the work of our community outreach and even the awesome things that TDP is doing, it's rooted in MOTEP. It's an expansion of MOTEP, and it's part of your legacy and vision. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think there are no other questions. So until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing Kenny soon. I'm going to be at the meeting in Cincinnati, and I know that's going to be a great meeting. And and I'm interested. I am interested in carrying on this great dialogue.
Absolutely.
All right. Until such time. Next week we will. In 2 weeks, our show will be. In 4 weeks, the topic has yet to be disclosed, but we will be back with the great Clive Callender, MOTEP, the Ron and Joy